Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctuary Podcast. This is episode number 16, Sweet 16.
Sweet 16, let's go get our license.
Yeah, I'm here. My name is Kevin, and I'm joining with my friend Rob once again for our 16th episode, which we're talking about life lessons, Jesus and the kingdom of God and how it impacts our life. So we've had a really busy 2 weeks. We took a week off from recording, and because it was Holy Week, it was Easter week, and it was a fantastic week. And starting with a couple Sundays ago at Sanctuary, Rob, you ended up giving the gospel message of Jesus' death and resurrection of the cross and the forgiveness we have through him. And 6 people responded.
At least
6 people responded to that message and giving their life to Jesus. Talk to me about that.
Well, I wasn't even expecting it to go in like this gospel altar call type way. It just lended itself to that way because the message was actually about what destroys and builds community, and
which we're going to dive into today.
Right, absolutely. And that was just from my experience in this community for the last 6 years. So I wasn't even looking to the outside saying like, what needs to change in the world? It was more so, what do we need to continue to change here at Sanctuary? But it was really more of a celebration service of, hey, we actually do this really well.
Yeah.
So continue to protect what is precious here. Continue to protect this beautiful community that we have going, where it really is set apart from the rest of the world, and where it really marks the kingdom coming to earth. And we get to be people that usher in that presence. So anyway, at the end of the night, there was, I remember specifically in the message that there were different parts where people were resonating with it more. This happens when you preach. You recognize like, all right, I can practice this as much as I want beforehand. Yeah. But there's just something about there's nothing, you can't necessarily prepare for what God is going to do in the moments where you're actually delivering it, and not just in you, but what he's doing in the room, what he's doing through the people. So I tended to notice that there was definitely a moment in the night where I was talking, it was the second point, the community destroyer is a commitment to offense, community builder is a commitment to grace. And I feel like right now that resonates most with what our world is experiencing versus what it needs.
Right.
So it ended up, by the end of the night, just kind of wrapping things up, saying like, hey, like if God, the only being in the universe who has any right to be wrathful, to be judgmental, to hold offense against us, found a way to mercy and forgiveness, how much more should we? And also saying like, hey, this is available for anyone and everyone. Like, God doesn't cancel you, he cancels our sin, is what Colossians 2 tells us. Literally with that word, it's amazing. Awesome. I think it's Colossians 2:14. I'll have to go back and check. Maybe I'll put in the comment section where it actually is. But I believe it's in that section where it talks about that he canceled our sin on the cross. So anyway, people were clearly responding to the forgiveness that God has for them, as people do, as we do, each and every day. And we had at least 6 new people step from eternal death into eternal life in the life-giving power of Jesus and the Spirit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That kicked off the week really well. That was Palm Sunday, actually. And then Tuesday night at our high school group called Fusion, Andres Ayala, who was with us a couple weeks ago for joining us on the podcast, he shared the same, a gospel message of Jesus Christ. And we had at least 4 students respond for the first time giving their life to Jesus. And we had like 15 students say, I haven't been actively walking with Jesus or in closeness like I want to, and just recommit their lives to following Jesus, which was awesome. Then we had here at Seniors of the Rock, which is our senior citizens ministry, and they had like a dozen, I think.
I think it was 15.
15 people give their life to Christ. In that Good Friday service. And then we had our Sanctuary Good Friday service. And this was the first Good Friday service of Kevin Butterfield's era 2.0 to come back and to be a part of. And what an awesome night. Between Zach and the worship team leading worship, which was so powerful.
Absolutely.
To have a prolonged and extended amount of time just worshiping Jesus, being in his presence. And then you gave a bomb message of coming from darkness into light through Jesus. And just the whole night was awesome. I have to tell you, my highlight of the night for me on many different ways was not only the whole thing, but was when you sent the prayer team around the room and said, hey, we're going to take a 10-minute block to reflect on the death of Christ and his forgiveness and anything that God wants to say in pulling you from darkness into light. If anyone needs prayer, go find one of these people and ask them to pray. Dude, I was stoked at the response of people.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yep. And the prayer team was sending in testimonies all weekend about things, without giving names, but things that they had prayed for with people. Because every single person that was on the prayer team that night prayed with at least a few people. So there were definitely so many testimonies of deliverance and healing.
Yeah.
And maybe even just God was able to speak through our prayer team to remind people of what God's already done for them.
Yeah.
And remember who God is in their lives. And it was just, it brought me a lot of joy this past weekend.
It's awesome.
Because that's what God does.
That's
what he's all about. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we had, as a church all together, both in person and online, we had nearly 3,000 people hear the Easter story.
Wow.
In the middle of COVID.
Crazy.
And that's amazing. And then this morning, my son Leon gave his life to Jesus.
Yeah.
Which is, So I was a little bit late coming in this morning because I was celebrating with my family. So April 7th, 2021, Leon, I will never forget this day.
Nice. That is awesome.
And he did it. And what's so amazing, hearing all this is you have a 3-year-old and you have people that are in their 90s responding to the gospel message of Jesus. Wow. And here's the deal. The story never gets old.
Right.
You're not too young for it. You're not too old for it. Like, Jesus is for everyone.
Yeah.
So what a way to celebrate. I call it the Super Bowl week for Christianity.
For real.
Holy Week. And just so many wins for the kingdom. And that's just in our church. And I know that there are so many other churches in our area and around the world that we're experiencing the resurrection life of Jesus.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Lord, for an amazing week. We say more please, more please. And for those of us who joined us, whether it was online or in person, we're so glad that you took the time to be a part of that. And so now let's break some things down. Like you mentioned a couple weeks ago, we're in this series called We Get Closer, which we're diving deeper into our core value of we get close, that God has wired us for close heart connection with him and with others in building communities. So we've been diving deeper into that, and you released a message which I thought was phenomenal, really, kind of as an encouragement to the sanctuary community and community in general, of some things that are community builders, and then there's some things that are community destroyers. So we're going to explore that a little bit more in depth. So Rob, can you just give us, a 50,000-foot overview and reminder and review of what the community destroyers and community builders were that we talked about, and then we're gonna dive in.
Absolutely. So what we were saying, we use Colossians 3:12 through 15 as a key text, which when you look at verse 12 in itself, you can do easily a 7-week series just on that one verse, like no problem. So Paul's speaking to this young church, and he's reminding them of what do God's people look like? What does a community of God look like, and how does it function? Right? So he reminds them first of their identity, that you're chosen.
Yeah.
Like God chose you. That's a big deal.
That is huge.
That you're holy, which is just a fancy Christian word for you're different, you're set apart, you're unique. Right?
Yeah.
And you're dearly loved by God. So he speaks to identity first, which the first, Andres called it sermon part 1, or the first sermon of the night was all about identity.
Right.
Because it's
both individual, our identity, your
individually,
identity, but also as a community.
Corporately.
Right.
Right.
That we're a group of people. We're not just a collection of people, a congregation. You can get a congregation anywhere, but a Christ-centered community is, like you said, chosen by God.
Chosen. Holy,
which is set apart for a purpose and completely forgiven,
right?
Made clean, and then the third one was dearly loved.
Yeah. Right. So that identity is so important, because if you're focusing on the now life change aspect, which follows that, without the identity, you're going to hit a dead end every time. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's what we're experiencing in our society right now, is that non-Christians can easily recognize that compassion is a good thing, right? Like we use that word a lot. Like, we need more compassion in our world, etc.
Unless you disagree with me.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's a huge part of it.
We could dive into that when we get to there.
But compassion has to look like something, and humility and tenderheartedness, like all these different things, they need to be actually defined. And when we have this identity in Jesus, when we identify ourselves with him, we say, hey, he's the one that defines what this actually looks like. So all of these great virtues is an overflow of the new identity that we have in Jesus. Like, you're going to find you're going to be working yourself to a dead end every single time if you do the virtues without the identity.
Yeah. And Rob, you just mentioned something I think is really powerful.
Tell me.
And I don't want to get lost in all the other powerful stuff. You said that it's community, or our identity, as he defines us.
Correct.
Not as we define ourselves or see ourselves or others see us. That's really important, because I see that we have our own definition of our own identity, or even as a group, what we either like to be or what we really believe about ourselves. But to start with that point of, what does God say about us? What does he define us? And sometimes we don't fully live up to that definition, but it's that definition that often pulls us towards what he says about us.
Exactly. And it's being reminded of that identity, right? It's being reminded, hey, God chose me. God chose us.
Right.
God calls me holy.
Yeah.
Like, and that's not just, that's who I am, and it's also who I am becoming. Right?
Right.
And then I'm dearly loved. Oh my goodness, the freedom that there is to know that I'm dearly loved by God.
Right.
That we're dearly loved by God.
Before we did anything to earn it.
Right. Like, yeah, it wasn't because I did all these other things that Paul mentions after. It's actually, no, I was doing the opposite of those things.
Yeah.
And still do on tough days and in weak moments, but God still dearly loves me anyway. So anyway, talked about that. I know you were asking for the 50,000 foot overview of the message. So there is identity, but then there were, okay, what does community look like?
Right.
When Jesus is their identity, community looks like this. So again, we could have gone so many ways with the message, but when I was narrowing down 4 things for our community, based on those 4 verses, the things that I chose to focus on was a community destroyer, is being a me monster, is what I called it. That selfish person. There's definitely pride tangled in that for sure. We might talk more about this. Versus a community builder, the opposite of that is compassionate listening and encouraging words.
Yeah.
Then there is next part in verse 13 where Paul talks about making allowance for each other's faults. And the NIV translation says, bear with each other. So I was talking about commitment, and a community destroyer is commitment to offense, and not just, again, I mentioned not just offending people, but remaining offendable.
Yeah.
By choosing to remain in offense.
Yep.
Versus a commitment to grace, right? So that whole make allowance for each other's faults, really what Paul's saying is, hey, give yourself a grace buffer for people when they hurt you, because that's what's going to happen. Any deep and meaningful relationship, there will be hurt.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it wasn't a, hey, you know what? If somebody hurts you.
Ever one day.
Right.
By chance.
if that happens to you, it might not ever happen. No, it's like, hey, people will hurt you, so be prepared for that, and have grace ready to respond to that hurt. And then the other two, in verse 14, I think is when I focused on dependability. So community destroyers not being reliable. I don't know if unreliable is a word, but
it is.
It is. All right, cool. My coffee hasn't kicked in yet. So yeah, unreliability. And a community builder is like, hey, being reliable, being dependable, being someone that you can count on. And
trustworthy.
Really, trustworthy. Yeah, it's like there's a word for that. But worthy of being trusted, because we mentioned in other podcasts, hey, something that will always build community and deeper community is trust and risk.
Yeah.
So be a person that is worthy of being trusted. And then lastly, it's so funny in verse 15, it almost seems like it's just like this thrown in thing last second, but Paul just writes, and be thankful at the end of verse 15. But it's like, no, that's so important. Like that's in there intentionally. So
and in almost every one of his letters, there's something about gratitude, being thankful with thanksgiving that's in there. So he repeats it because it's so powerful and important.
Right. So like
it's not a throwaway line.
Not at all.
Right.
It was very much intentional. And the last part that I mentioned there was a community destroyer is gossip and slander. I think anybody can see that. But a community builder is gratitude and celebration, right? So the example I used there was it's really tough to dislike someone that you're thankful for. So try to find ways to be thankful for people, thankful for what you have, thankful for who God has placed in your life. So yeah, those were the 4 things.
That's awesome. I love that how you laid that out. Community destroyers. There are things that will actually pull down community, and there's things that will actually build community. And as you define it, like community is about building heart connection and building spiritual unity, which is so powerful. Can I tell you, Psalm 133, how blessed it is, my brothers, when brothers and sisters get along, that it commands the blessing of the Lord.
Come on.
So if that's true, if there's spiritual unity, and even Jesus, we've talked about this before on this podcast, John 17, his last, earthly prayer before the cross in the garden was, Father, I pray that they would become one. That's you and me, that we would become one as he says, as you and I are one, as the Father and the Son are one, that they would be one, that the world will know that you have sent me and have called me. So there is an unbelievable, powerful spiritual dynamic in our world when we are in common unity, when we're in community. That's so powerful. The enemy knows it, and that's why he tries to sow seeds of division at every level, usually starting in our hearts, like you said. And we'll get to that, like bitter offense and so on this Sunday probably.
Hey.
Which is so powerful that the enemy knows the power of unity. The supernatural power of unity, a collection of people that don't have much in common coming together and have everything in common in Jesus. And then he's trying to sow seeds of division, which is a community destroyer. And we can either partner with that, as you kind of talk about, or we can partner with the Lord in building community.
Yes.
So let's dive into the first one. Is that cool?
Yes.
My guess is this is going to have to be at least a 2-parter because we don't want to rush through these. Because I know our heart is, we want to see that dream that Jesus had in John 17 of us becoming one. We want to partner with that dream. So let's build community. So let's talk about the first one. Me monster and versus that's the community destroyer. Let's talk about that. Let's just identify and define what a me monster is and why it impacts community.
So I think a me monster, in the way that I was thinking about it, is people who have a very tough time thinking outside of themselves and their own experience, their own feelings, how a situation affects them personally, etc. And it's a form of pride. It is. Like, so often we think of like pride is, the Zlatan Ibrahimoviches of the world, which
that's a soccer player for those of you who don't know.
Swedish soccer player. He's great, one of the best players in the world, but he absolutely knows it. And is his own PR firm, and I'm not on here to like blast him.
No, I get it.
Because
as a
most
point
of the
of
time he's
identification.
put on blast.
Yeah.
But most of the time when we think of pride, we think of people like Ibrahimovic, who just thinks he's the best thing walking on earth.
Yeah.
But pride also looks like a obsession with self, in the sense where, I was actually expecting this to happen when Hannah and I talked about our move to Wisconsin coming up. I was expecting a lot of people to come up and say, how does this affect like them personally, and how can you guys do this? We didn't get that at all. Like, again, I'm so grateful for this community. This doesn't actually exist here very often. But other things that I mentioned, like I give the example when my grandma passed away, and instead of people being able to identify or to sit with me in pain,
right,
it was like, yeah, my cat died once. I know what you're going through.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, I understand what, like, and I wasn't holding bitterness or anything towards it, but it was just like, hey, that I didn't need to hear about
your cat.
Yeah, right. And at the same time, I don't want to be selfish in those moments either. But a me monster is really just someone who is constantly thinking about like me. How does this affect me? Instead of how can I maybe potentially affect others in a positive way? How can I be a good friend to others? Like instead of looking out for myself all the time, it's outward focused.
Totally. That's Philippians 2. It talks about selfish ambition. Most of us don't have this overt selfish ambition plan. We just think about ourselves a lot.
Right.
That's what we struggle with, that mean monster inside of us. All of us have to tame that mean monster, or let Jesus change our hearts in that with humility. That is such a powerful thing.
It also reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote, by the way, about humility. He's actually talking about of humility is not thinking less of myself. It's about thinking of myself less.
Yeah, that's right.
That's probably one of my all-time favorites on humility, but I'm sorry.
No, that's absolutely it, because it's easy, for us in a fallen world to think that we're the center of the universe, at least the center of our own universe, and then act in that way. And so, it happens in church sometimes. Like, I didn't really like those songs that we sang today. I didn't really like the way that message was delivered. I didn't like the way that, people greeted me or didn't greet me. I didn't like the way that the stage looked. I didn't like, the coffee at church, whatever. All those I statements, are the things that we're actually saying, oh, so I think that I am the highest level of authority in the world. Like, it's all about me, whether I like it or not, rather than anything else. And
I'm feeling some conviction right now.
Me too.
As you're saying that, because I do that sometimes. I'm like, why is the stage looking like this right now? Like, even just like that, I would never set up the stage that way.
Right.
And yeah, it's convicting. So we're all guilty of that.
So the me monster thing, though, I want to explore that too, because I've seen it really. It's a blind spot that we all have. And if we don't recognize it, how it impacts relationship. Let me give you an example.
Please.
So Carrie and I have a really good friend who's an amazing guy. He's just really gifted. He's anointed, and we love him to death. He's made a huge impact on Carrie and I in our life. And God has given him a lot of understanding, and which is phenomenal. But he came to me one day and he said, "Hey, Kevin, I've noticed after years of knowing you and Carrie, you seem to have favor with leaders that I don't have. What gives you that level of favor?" And he was expecting some super spiritual answer. And I had to say to him, in love, because I loved him, I said, my experience, and this is not just leaders, because it goes into what you're talking about, compassionate listening, was if I sit down with someone and the first thing I say is, tell me your story. Tell me about yourself. Tell me what God's doing in your life. Tell me what's going on. I'm asking questions about, and what that's saying to them is, I think you're important. I think what you're going through is important. I want to know more about you. And I have learned so much from people by just asking those questions. What's God taught you in your life? And just follow-up questions too. And what that's doing is I'm listening to them and I'm extracting knowledge from them. Now, what that does is that leader is also saying, hey, Kevin values what I'm saying. Carrie values what the experiences I've had. And it gives us favor. And I'm saying that not in a way of manipulating people to get favor. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what my friend would often do is, because God had done so much in his life, that when he sat down with leaders, he would be the me monster and just start sharing all the things that God's been doing, all the things that he's been saying. The problem is that it was never reciprocal. After 2 hours, he had told them everything that he had gone through, but never asked, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me your story. Tell me what God's doing in you. And that me monster came in, and it was a blind spot for him. And I said, I would encourage you. And he was the kind of guy that I could listen to for 2 hours, because there was so much that was good, and I learned so much from it. But if he wants to have favor in relationship with other people, he's got to start by showing favor of going, I want to know about you. So that builds community. What if we all did that? Hey, let's grab a cup of coffee and not talk about, the things that divide our world so much, and just start, I want to hear your story. Tell me where you grew up. Tell me what things were like, not in some like creepy therapist kind of way of just, inappropriately, kind of going, but just go, I want to know the story of Rob, because if I understand your story, then I know a little bit more about you, and that builds heart connection too. When I've heard the amazing things you've gone through and the hard things you've gone through, it builds heart connection, and it builds empathy. And so that's a really important thing in our world, especially in our world of DMs and text messages and Instagram posts, where they're very often, we've talked about this before, very surface level. The me monster can come in really quickly. Any thoughts on that?
A lot of thoughts. Thanks for sharing that, because this actually brings me back to something we mentioned a few weeks ago, that our deepest desire as humanity is also to be known and to feel like we're known, right? So what you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, is me monsters tend, like, you can almost see the insecurity in them of, I just want to be known, I want to be known, I want to be known.
Right. And that's the double coin of pride and insecurity. Right. It's two sides of the same coin.
Yep. But when you ask questions, it's saying, I want to know you.
Right.
And I think that's something that I'm trying to grow in myself as well, is ask better questions, ask questions that are meaningful and that matter. I think a go-to one that I'll always ask, which I learned from one of my missions professors in my undergrad, especially with people that aren't from America, but even people in our country. People that are outside of this country love to be asked, how is your family? Tell me about your family, right? Most of the time it's like, what we start with here is, how is work going?
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily bad.
Not bad.
It's not a bad thing to ask, but just recognizing that other cultures value family highest. So when you ask people, how's your family doing? Tell me about your family. Most people feel really known when you ask them that question. So that's one that I always go to immediately. Tell me about your family. How's your family doing? Others as well. I mean, you mentioned some things. When somebody's sharing their story, ask more questions around it, ask more questions about it. I think even just a really simple thing to say is, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me more. Ooh, I want to learn more about that.
Yeah. What was that like?
Yeah. Again, showing interest. And again, if we're looking out for each other, in an ideal setting in the church, if everybody's looking out for everyone else, then you don't have to worry about looking for yourself, because other people are looking out for you. Other people are going to help you feel known, etc. I want to get better at asking questions. I want to be that humble person, especially like, I remember, again, in part of my own story and my own pride and insecurity, I remember sitting down with some really important people in our faith and even in our overall world, people outside of our faith. And I've had the opportunity to chat with some really amazing people in my life. And they're normally the ones that are asking me tons of questions. And I'm like, I've left like, a half an hour to an hour meetup. And I'm like, I talked the whole time. Like, what the heck? So I'm like, my goodness, they're trying to make me feel known, but I want to get to know them better. So I'm like, I need to ask better questions because I want to hear, like the John Maxwells of the world. Like, sure. John, you are phenomenal at asking questions. How did you get to ask such good questions? Like, and that's just an example. So anyway, yeah.
No, that's good. And I think that makes a huge difference in building community, whether it's a small group, whether it's a core group of friends. We've heard this too. Like sometimes people will have friends, and we talked about the 4 hubs of community. Sometimes in that social circle of hanging out with each other, the thing that actually takes that group of friends from just having fun to now impacting and deep and meaningful is the right questions, and then listening the right way. The community builder of compassionate listening. Sometimes compassionate listening just starts with good listening, asking questions and just start listening. And then when people start sharing deeper and meaningful things, put yourselves in a place of compassion and empathy, and in that way.
Other questions I like asking, by the way, that I want to impart to our community is, what is the most fun thing you're doing with Jesus right now in this season?
Wow.
The reverse of that I ask as well is, where do you find yourself most resisting God right now?
Ooh.
Yeah. And then ask, especially with that second one, where do you find yourself most resisting God right now? Ask, so why do you think that is? What do you think is coming up where you're meeting God with resistance, right? And what's something that we can do together to help break through that? Other questions I asked you guys I asked the student min office a couple days ago, what is one question that you pray you're never asked?
It's just, what are you uncomfortable talking about?
Yeah, what are you uncomfortable talking about, and why?
Yeah.
Why is it that you're uncomfortable talking about this?
And then learning as a me monster, learning within that to ask questions, but also to read social cues. Because what you're not saying is, Rob, on a Sunday night, you're like, hey, what's your name? I'm Rob. And they're like, hey, I'm John. And you're like, where do you go to school? I go to Quinnipiac. Hey, where are you resisting God? You don't jump into that level of conversations. Right. It's a level 5 conversation. And the person's like, what's your name again? You're like, you don't want to do that. But also in developing community, it's really sad. I know, I don't want to use this person's name because I haven't asked them permission, but someone who was part of a community for nearly 5 years that never built a heart connection with that community. And one of the things this person said, and this isn't person just a casual attender, someone on the fringes of things. This is someone who's into a big part of the community. And this person said, no one in 5 years ever asked me my story or about myself. No one ever asked me what my experience in life or in leadership has been. This is someone who's been a significant leader. And they said, and this person said, it disconnected them from community, not only for this person who's saying, I could have gotten more connected in community if this happened, but also going, this community missed out on a lot of experiences that this person goes, I'm not going to do the selfish ambition thing. I'm not just going to insert myself into places that people aren't inviting me into. And so learning how to do that by just starting to ask questions with each other, hearing people's stories in that way. I can tell you, I don't do this naturally. Carrie does it naturally, and she's much better at it than I am. But learning how to do that helps break the me monster cycle. Intentionally going, hey, let's go out to dinner, and I'm not going to just talk about my life or my world or my experience, but start asking questions about people. Josh Russo, part of our sanctuary community. Yep. Josh and Michelle. Josh, one of the first times I met him, he goes, Kevin, what are you learning right now? And Zach's laughing because he knows Josh, and that's such a Josh question, but a powerful question. And it was like, Josh was like, I want to learn from what you're learning. I want to learn about you and how you think, not in like some like, again, manipulative way or like Svengali way of like bringing control, but really going, I can learn a lot about Kevin by how he answers that questions about learning and what he's learning.
And you learn a lot about Josh by asking him that question too. So I returned the favor and asked him that.
Absolutely.
And he said, I'm learning about ancient grains right now. Which is the most Josh Russo response. I love that, dude.
But that also shows that Josh likes learning.
Yeah.
He likes researching and growing. That's part of it. He's interested in it because he wants to grow. Those are great things.
Literally.
Hey, we've just scratched the surface of point number 1 of Me Monster versus compassionate listening. Rob, a couple maybe like action points that someone can have this week of learning to become a community builder, someone who listens really well.
Ask good questions.
Yeah.
Find good questions to ask. I think that 2 people that I have come to mind immediately that are some of the best question askers I know, that you can find their stuff easily on a Google search. John Maxwell asks extremely good questions.
Good.
He even has something called 7 questions I ask everyone when I meet with them.
Whoa.
And then the other is Gordon McDonald. Shout out to Gordon McDonald, Patty and Mark. They're in this area. They're great people and involved with BlackRock. Mark is his son. Patty's his daughter-in-law. Gordon is a legendary pastor in this area, and he asks a ton of great questions too. I remember in his book, Rebuilding Your Broken World, he has about 20-something or so questions that he asks friends on the regular.
Wow.
That have been really helpful to my own life. So I would say research those 2 guys, figure out what they're asking, and start incorporating those questions into your regular conversation.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I would give one more point.
Go for it,
Maybe
please.
even intentionally reach out to someone this week through even a text or a phone call, or grab a coffee together at Source Coffee in Bridgeport, my favorite. Shout out.
They're not paying us to say that, so we really do love them.
Absolutely. If they want to give the love,
please.
Coffee beans would be great. Anyways.
Courtney's been great to us, though.
They have been amazing. But like, set up an appointment and actually go into it with going, what are the 4 questions I want to ask about this person? I want to grow in them. I want to connect with them. I want to build community, which would be awesome. Cool. You want to send us out with a blessing?
Bless you all to have amazing conversations, to grow in your friendships and in your relationships, and to be marked by God, who has chosen you, who has called you holy, says that you're dearly loved, and additionally, that you will be marked by some of those things we just mentioned today: humility and compassion, tenderheartedness, all of that fun stuff. Bless you to do that and live it out well this week.
Thanks for joining the Sanctuary Podcast. We'll hope to be talking to you and seeing you and hearing from you all the things that you're learning. Bless you.